Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. Time for Ryan Wilson's mock draft, released hours ago on this Monday, the day after Christmas. Here's the top 10. Bryce Young, the Houston Texans, going number 1 overall, quarterback out of Alabama. We talked about Seattle getting that pick from Denver. Will Anderson Jr., the edge rusher from the Crimson Tide, going that way. You might see a trend here, and the theme, of course, with the quarterbacks, with Young at 1, Will Levis at 5, and then C.J. Stroud at 8. 3 quarterbacks there in the top 10. Back here with Ryan Wilson and Brady Quinn, I'm Tommy Tran. So here we go, Ryan, your reasoning behind Bryce Young on Alabama, and just off the board is Quentin Johnston out of TCU, paired up in Houston together. What are your thoughts about putting those two in your mock?
I think it's a great idea, Tommy. Next question. No, I mean, look, the Texans need a ton of help, right? Both at quarterback, where Davis Mills doesn't appear to be the guy. They're subbing him out with Jeff Driscoll, and yeah, they beat the Titans, but a Titans team that's been beset by injuries. But in terms of Bryce Young, he's been the best quarterback for me play in and play out over the course of the 2022 season. The issue, and we talk about it all the time, you could probably tell me my talking points, you know them so well now, Tommy. He's 5'10", he's about 185, and he's not going to get much bigger. So you have to understand that when you're making these decisions. And there are NFL teams that love Bryce Young, and there are a lot more NFL teams that are concerned about the size and what it means. Because Kyler Murray was obviously short by NFL quarterback standards, and so was Russ Wilson, but they were thick. And you don't get that when you get Bryce Young. But he does so many things well, and he does them consistently well. And he wasn't throwing to the same guys that Tua and Mac Jones were throwing to coming out of Alabama, all those first-round picks. And he's basically dragged this team as far as he could. They didn't make the playoffs, obviously, but I thought he got more out of this group than we saw in previous teams because he didn't have the playmakers around him. Quentin Johnston, meanwhile, is a game changer. He's a huge target, big catch radius. He runs. He's going to run really well. He moves in terms of short area like he's about 5'10 or 5'11. And as I mentioned, there aren't a lot of playmakers on this Texans roster outside of Brandon Cooks and maybe Nico Collins if you want to throw him in there. So if you're looking for a rebuild, those are two good places to start, assuming, of course, Brady, that you love Bryce Young as your QB1.
Yeah, and look, I do. I think you love the film, especially for a lot of the reasons that you talked about. He really did elevate the level of play of everyone out around him. And I think he was the eraser back there at quarterback sometimes where there were some protection issues. There was the inability to separate and get open downfield. And he was able to buy some time and create with his legs, whether running or just extending the play to allow guys to open up downfield. And you touched on just the lack of receivers that both Tua had and Mac Jones had during his time there. Even Jalen Hurts during that period of time. I mean, they've had a run of receivers, and I think that's the hard part being critical about the Alabama wide receiver group is none of them seem to look like what we saw in years past, at least the past 5 years or so. So it was obviously an uphill battle, I think, for Bryce Young this particular year. Still, a tremendous ability to keep his team in games and fight. Everyone's going to talk about the lack of size, and I think Ryan touched on the most important pieces. He's not as beefed up as some of the other guys who are a little shorter were. But I do think he does do a really good job of protecting himself when he is outside the pocket, getting rid of the football and knowing when to reserve his right to punt sometimes and not trying to get everything out of that last play, which is smart and important if you want to play the next series, the next down, the next game. And so he does have that high football IQ that you're looking for. So, again, it makes a lot of sense in my opinion. And the height thing, look, he's dealt with that his entire life, much like we talked about with Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson. Those guys have all dealt with the same thing. It's just more about the abuse of taking on 17 games in the NFL season, all those hits, if they can't protect him, and how they go about trying to protect him if they've got offensive line issues. In regards to Quentin Johnston, love the player, love the upside and the ability as far as creating some big plays. And trust me, this Houston Texans offense could use it, right? And especially if he has a hard time separating, Bryce Young can make something happen to allow him to separate downfield. The question to me, at least as far as how I view this year's draft class of wide receiver is, Jordan Addison is the player that I think will end up taken as the first wide receiver in this year's draft class. He's more polished as a route runner. He's played in a couple systems now where he's obviously been able to display himself as one of the top receivers in college football. He's got tremendous hands. And even though he's a bit undersized, I still think he's got that blazing fast speed that you're looking for. So Quentin Johnston will definitely be in that conversation. I'll be curious to see how he looks and how fluid he looks working through some of the drills in the combine when these guys can be paired, side by side with one another. But bottom line is, if you're Houston right now and you're a Texans fan, this would be a gigantic get for you in this year's draft.
Yeah, compare them with Dameon Pierce having a nice rookie season for an offensive trio there in Houston. You guys were talking about Bryce Young, whatever concerns people may have about his frame. If you're going more prototypical, Will Levis at 6'3", 230, going to the Colts at 5 and the second quarterback off the board. Ryan, what are you hearing about him? Because I think there is some fluctuation in people, how they view him, but scouts and GMs that you talk to really like the guy.
They like him a lot, Tommy, and it's not curious because if you watch him over the summer from last year's tape, there was reasons to like Will Levis a lot, and Brady can talk to how things have changed for Will Levis during the 2022 season. New offensive coordinator, no one to throw the ball to, the offensive line wasn't very good, and he was injured as well. So there are a lot of mitigating factors as to why he didn't look like a first-round pick or if we're being frank, a second-round pick. That said, if you go back to the tape, and here's the what I would get oftentimes when I talk to scouts, well, what has changed from 2021 to 2022? And I just laid out all the things that have changed. Scouts, you talk to any scout, they will tell you that they love Will Levis. Now, sometimes you will find front office folks who are a little more trepidatious because what happens? If you draft a guy that's a 3-year project, you're going to be out of job in a year and a half, so it doesn't matter. So you're thinking more short term. But scouts are there to evaluate these guys, and they understand the totality of what Will Levis brings. He has experience. He started at Penn State. He was really good in 2021 for Kentucky, and he wasn't good this year. So you have to figure out which Will Levis is going to show up. So he's probably going to go to a bad football team, but is there an infrastructure in place, like the Colts, for example, in which they can build around him and help him have that success? And there are very few NFL teams that are down on Will Levis, no matter what they saw over the last 4 or 5 months. And I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. He could end up being QB1, Tommy and Brady. He could end up being QB2 behind a CJ Stroud, for example. So there's going to be a lot of variability, which will make this a lot of fun as we go through the process over the next few months.
Well, fun's one way of putting it, Ryan. I think fascinating is the other thing to talk about because I think Will Levis' situation, circumstance that he enters into is probably paramount, for his success. Everyone wants to talk about, hey, who's the next Josh Allen? Well, who's the next team that's going to be able to allow that guy to start for 3 years and have the same offensive coordinator, everything else around him, and then go get one of the best wide receivers in the NFL and Stephon Diggs, and then allow him to flourish in year 3? There's not many situations that allow you to do that. We can go through a list of names. So, are the Colts willing to give him 3 years to display what he's truly capable of being at the end of the day? I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. They've got a lot of questions to answer in Indianapolis, especially with the head coaching position, whether or not Jeff Saturday is going to be the guy or if they're going to open things up. But if you watch the tape of Will Levis, you can see why NFL evaluators are intrigued by his skill set. He's got one of the strongest arms in this draft class. The ball jumps off his hand. It comes out very easily. He can make the off-platform throws where his legs and his body aren't necessarily aligned to where he's throwing the football. And by the way, Ryan touched on his tape from last season, which I think most people would say, yeah, it looked better because they were more successful as a team. Statistically speaking, though, it wasn't that far off from what it was a year ago. He played 2 less games this season, threw for about 400 yards less. It wasn't quite a 2 touchdown to 1 interception ratio, which is always something you're kind of looking for in order to determine decision making. But he actually had a higher quarterback rating this year than he had just a year ago. So I know the tape didn't look great at times. He was battling through injuries. People will tell you that there were times he didn't practice at all during the week. He's in a walking boot, has his arm in a sling, and he's still making out there to play on Saturdays. So there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes, I think, why people are so high on this young man. And you can see it when you watch the tape. But again, situation, circumstance, that's going to be paramount for Will Levis to have success at the NFL level. And patience, the last thing I might add there, Tommy.
To your point, though, Brady, maybe it's time that Indy does that because ever since Andrew Luck retired abruptly, they were sort of in win-now mode. They always went sort of the veteran route, and it hasn't worked out for them. Whether it's going to be Jeff Saturday or another head coach, it'll be interesting to see if it indeed comes to fruition. Ryan, you mentioned C.J. Stroud. You've got him go to the Panthers. Carolina all of a sudden getting hot, a fringe playoff team. They're fighting for the division. You've got C.J. Stroud, 8th overall to Carolina.
They need a quarterback, and that's the reality. And David Tepper, the owner, tried to get Deshaun Watson in the offseason. That didn't work out. So he settled for Baker Mayfield, and that didn't work out. They're now back on Sam Darnold, who is working for now. But they'll probably be looking for a new head coach, even though Steve Wilkes is doing a fantastic job. And Sam Darnold's flashed a little bit, but do you trust him long term? Probably not. So if you end up with a top 10 pick, you'll probably have an opportunity at one of the 3 quarterbacks we're talking about so far. And if it's C.J. Stroud or Will Levis or Bryce Young, you're probably pulling the trigger on one of those guys. And C.J. Stroud, It's weird to say he's flown under the radar nationally because we're talking about these other quarterbacks. It seems like a lot more, but he's had a really good season. And you talk to evaluators, and if you just watch with your eyeballs, you can see that C.J. Stroud is a better passer of the football coming out of Ohio State than Justin Fields was. Now, he's not the athlete because no one is. Justin Fields is a special talent when he tucks the ball and starts running. But C.J. Stroud does a lot of things in structure that Justin Fields is still sort of figuring out in Chicago and even when he left Ohio State. Now, look, the argument you'll get is that he doesn't throw a lot of anticipation, but part of the reason is because those guys are running wide open, starting with Marvin Harrison, who could be the first overall pick a year from now. But I think if you're the Carolina Panthers, this is an upgrade. This isn't a stretch in terms of overdrafting a player like C.J. Stroud or even a Will Levis. C.J. Stroud has better tape this year, clearly, and I think if he's here, the Panthers are probably going to run to the metaphorical stage there and turn in the card because they desperately need a quarterback.
When protected, C.J. Stroud is probably the most accurate quarterback in this year's draft class. And that's going to be a big question mark when he gets to Carolina. Again, talked about it with the Colts. The Carolina Panthers still have a lot of question marks as their season still ensues with Steve Wilks doing a heck of a job as the interim head coach. So is he going to be the head coach for that upcoming season and be a part of the process of drafting C.J. Stroud, or is it going to be someone else? Whatever the case may be, figuring out how you can supply C.J. Stroud with better protection like he's had at times at Ohio State, and obviously playmakers around him, which he definitely has had during his time at Ohio State. It's going to be the biggest question mark because this team has shown a lot of grit, the way they run the football, play physical up front, the way they can play defense. But in the passing game, that's lacking. C.J. Stroud can bring his skill set and tools to that, but he also has to bring a little bit more ability to extend plays and move it in the pocket. He does it sparingly. It feels like he wants to make it 7-on-7 out there. When he does, he's as lethal as anyone, and I think he can be anyone in the league. But the question is, going to a team that struggled to protect their quarterbacks, whichever one has played this season in Carolina, that's going to be one of my key concerns if C.J. Stroud ends up there, is how he transitions into a group that is going to be protecting him quite as well. But no doubt about it, Ryan touched on it. He's kind of flown under the radar, not necessarily sure why. Maybe we get tired of talking about Ohio State quarterbacks and Ryan Day for the success they've had or the numbers they put up because of how much talent they have around them. Whatever the case may be, he very deservedly is going to be a first-round pick. It just depends on where.
And you can add to that in the national semifinal where Ohio State takes on Georgia, of course, in the Peach Bowl. Guys, we're going to talk about one more quarterback here in the top 15. It has shades of the 21 class. And we know last year in 22 was kind of a down year for quarterbacks with Kenny Pickett, the only one going to the first round. So, Ryan, you have the Jets and Anthony Richardson 15th overall. We know what the Jets are dealing with Mike White now healthy enough to play, and Zach Wilson, the former number 2 overall pick in that class of 21, really struggling to even find any type of success on the field.
Yeah, Tommy, so this is the time of the show where I promote the With the First Pick podcast with Rick Spielman, the former Vikings general manager. And Spielman said recently that you give young quarterbacks, first-round picks especially, 3 years, maybe 4. And it just feels like, and we're all sort of in the same room nodding towards one another going, yeah, Zach Wilson, this thing doesn't feel like it's going to work out. So do you suck it up and endure another year of that and Mike White and Joe Flacco and whomever else may end up being quarterback? Or do you rip the Band-Aid off and start over? And if you're thinking about ripping the Band-Aid off and you're around the middle of the first round and someone like Anthony Richardson is there, maybe you roll the dice on him. And he is going to be a very controversial player, not because of off-the-field stuff. By all accounts, he's a good young man, but in terms of the lack of experience and whether he should have returned to Florida, I think he should have, but I'm not going to begrudge the guy for wanting to get paid either. He had fewer than 70 snaps the season before last when he was sharing snaps with Emory Jones, so he hasn't played a ton. But when he flashes, it takes your breath away. And Brady talked about Will Levis' arm strength. Anthony Richardson has Will Levis-type arm strength. The difference is he runs like Justin Fields, and that's what makes him so dynamic. Now, is that a great landing spot for him? Maybe not, because Zach Wilson didn't work out, and they sort of need a quarterback to play right away. But if they're not in position to do that, perhaps they think a year or two down the road. And Spielman talked about this, and so did a scout I talked to recently. They compare Anthony Richardson in a lot of ways to Malik Willis in that he's a really good athlete, great arm. He's bigger, stronger, faster, but he also is raw. And you have to understand that when you bring him into your organization. I know Brady likes to play the young kids. He's on the Pete Prisco fast track to Hall of Fame quarterbacking, but I don't know if you can do that with Anthony Richardson just because he hasn't played a ton, Brady.
You can do it. You just have to scheme around it. And I actually will defend you placing him here at the New York Jets for a couple of reasons. First, I think when their offensive line is going to be healthy and with their rushing attack and personnel, he will be able to succeed if they can give him a game plan that's not too much for him to handle as a rookie. Now, you can also potentially walk him into this, allowing Mike White to start the season. Maybe he's your transitional or bridge quarterback until Anthony Richardson feels more confident with what he's seeing and what he's getting. But either way, he's oozes with talent. I mean, he really does. People want to compare him to Malik Willis, and no disrespect to Malik Willis, but this kid's got way more talent, a bigger arm. He showcases more accuracy. He's not as raw. I think when he showcases what he's capable of, you see it. You see number one overall potential ability with his skill set. So I'm a huge Anthony Richardson fan because I think I can see down the line what he can potentially become and be. And by the way, can I just say this to the New York Jets fans? I tried to tell you before the season started about this. No one wanted to listen. Everyone wanted to try to give me a hard time, but the season's not even over yet, and we've now got Ryan mocking up the Jets taking a quarterback. So I just want to go back. Maybe there's some freezing cold takes that some of you Jets fans had out there on social media. I'd love to go back and revisit those, but I'll be taking a victory lap until next year's draft, and we'll see what the Jets do.
It's crazy. There's also Trey Lance news, Zach Wilson news. We're taking that 21 class again and going, boy, what could you get for 2 and 3 nowadays here coming up in 2023? All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. But before we do, again, talking about that With the First Pick podcast with our guy, draft analyst Ryan Wilson, and our GM, Rick Spielman. Make sure you scan that QR code and check out the guys leading up to draft day.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.